When the news spread through the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, people stopped to listen. Captain Ibrahim Traoré tilde copyright stood before the nation and spoke not of weapons or war, but of walls, roofs, and dignity. 50,000 homes, free for the people. Mothers clutched their children tighter, elders closed their eyes in disbelief, and young men whispered, "Could this finally be for us?" Hope, long silent, began to breathe again. Soon, empty land transformed into living neighborhoods, brick by brick. Burkina Faso's hands-built homes meant not for profit, but for pride. Farmers returned from fields to real doors they could lock, students studied under solid roofs, and widows slept without fear of rain or eviction. The homes were simple, but they carried something rare, the feeling that the nation remembered its people. As families lit their first fires inside new kitchens, the glow spilled softly into the night, turning rows of new houses into a constellation of quiet dreams. The smell of millet porridge and stewed vegetables drifted through the air, mixing with laughter that felt almost unfamiliar after years of worry. For many, this was the first night they slept without calculating tomorrow's rent, without fearing a knock from a landlord or the collapse of a fragile mud wall during the rainy season. The homes stood firm, and so did the people inside them. In one courtyard, an old man named Salih ran his hand slowly along the smooth wall, as if touching it too quickly might make it disappear. He had raised 7 children in borrowed rooms and temporary shelters, always promising that one day they would have a place that truly belonged to them. That promise had followed him into old age, heavy with regret. Now, sitting on a wooden stool under a sky full of stars, he felt the weight lift. His grandchildren chased each other across the packed earth, their feet slapping against the ground with carefree joy. "This," he whispered, "is what peace feels like." Nearby, a young teacher named Awa arranged her few books on a small shelf by the window. For years, she had taught her students about hope and responsibility while living in a single rented room, her lessons echoing against thin walls. Tonight, she prepared her class plans at a real table, lamplight steady, no neighbor complaining, no roof leaking onto her papers. She imagined inviting her students to study groups, imagined girls staying in school longer because they now had safe homes and quiet places to read. Education, she realized, had just gained a stronger foundation. The neighborhoods quickly grew into communities. At dawn, women swept their doorsteps in unison, greeting one another like family. Men discussed crops, work, and plans for small businesses they could now start from home. Children walked to school together, their backpacks bouncing, their paths no longer defined by displacement. Where there had once been scattered lives moving in isolation, there was now rhythm and connection. The homes did more than shelter bodies, they stitched people together. Elders began to meet in shaded corners, sharing stories of Burkina Faso's past of resilience, struggle, and pride. They spoke of how land and home had always been central to dignity, how losing them had wounded the spirit as much as hunger wounded the body. To them, the project felt like a correction of history, a quiet acknowledgement that the nation could not move forward while its people slept on uncertainty. Their words carried gravity, but also relief. As weeks turned into months, the impact spread beyond the walls. Markets grew busier as residents invested in their surroundings. Small gardens appeared behind houses, green shoots pushing through soil that had once been ignored. Tailors set up sewing machines near doorways, mechanics repaired bicycles in front yards, and food sellers turned kitchens into livelihoods. Stability gave birth to productivity, and productivity fed confidence. People no longer felt like temporary guests in their own country. The children, perhaps, felt it most deeply. They no longer asked when they would have to move again. They painted pictures of their houses at school, each drawing filled with bright colors and smiling faces. Teachers noticed changes: a better attendance, sharper focus, fewer signs of trauma. A home, it turned out, was the first classroom, the first lesson in belonging. Word of the neighborhoods traveled far, carried by visitors and returning relatives. In distant villages, people listened with cautious optimism. Some had lost homes to conflict, others to poverty or neglect. The idea that the government would build without demanding payment felt almost unreal, yet proof stood in concrete and brick. in laughter echoing through courtyards. The project became a story people told each other to survive difficult days. Captain Traore tilde copyright test name surfaced often in conversations, but not with the distant tone reserved for leaders. People spoke of him as someone who had listened, someone who had chosen a path that touched ordinary lives, whether they supported him politically or not. They felt seen. In a land where promises had often faded, this one had taken shape, solid and undeniable. At night, as generators hummed softly and radios played low music, families gathered to talk about the future. They spoke of expanding rooms, planting trees, sending children to university, caring for aging parents with dignity. Dreams once postponed were now carefully unpacked and examined, no longer dangerous to imagine. The homes had given people permission to plan again. There were challenges, of course. Roads needed improvement, water systems required maintenance, and not every problem vanished with a roof. But even these issues felt different now, shared, solvable, approached with patience rather than despair. When people have something to protect, they become guardians of progress. Community meetings formed, neighbors organized cleanups, and responsibility replaced resignation. As the rainy season arrived, the true test came. Rain drummed heavily against roofs, water rushed through gutters, and families waited anxiously. When morning came, the houses still stood, dry floors, intact walls, sleeping children. That morning, many cried quietly, not from fear, but from release. The rain no longer meant loss. The project's meaning grew beyond housing. It became a symbol of what could happen when leadership aligned with human need. Journalists, visitors, and skeptics walked through the neighborhoods, observing not just buildings, but confidence. They saw people standing straighter, speaking louder, engaging more. Dignity, once eroded, was rebuilding itself alongside the homes. Years later, when children from these neighborhoods would speak of their beginnings, they would not start with displacement or struggle alone. They would speak of a moment when the nation chose to invest in its people, when stability replaced survival. They would remember courtyards filled with laughter, neighbors who became family, and the first night they slept without fear. And so, Traore tilde copyright test project lived in awe not only in numbers or reports, but in daily life. In every meal shared across a fence, every book read under a steady roof, every dream spoken aloud without shame. The home stood as quiet witnesses to a powerful truth. When a people are given ground to stand on, they rise together. Years passed, and the neighborhoods that once felt new began to feel timeless. Trees planted as thin saplings now stretched wide, offering shade where elders gathered in the afternoons. Walls that had smelled of fresh cement carried layers of stories, scratches from children's games, paint faded by sun and rain, small repairs made with care. These signs of wear did not signal decay, they signaled ownership. The homes were alive because the people had claimed them fully. A generation was growing up that did not remember life before stability. Teenagers argued about football teams, music, and exams, not about where they would sleep next month. They spoke confidently about becoming engineers, nurses, builders, and teachers, many inspired by the very project that had shaped their childhood. Some wanted to design better homes, others better cities, determined to improve what had already been started. For them, housing was no longer charity, it was a standard. Local schools expanded as enrollment rose. Parents, no longer consumed by survival, attended meetings, volunteered time, and demanded quality education. Classrooms filled with students who arrived well-rested and prepared. Teachers noticed a shift not only in performance, but in attitude. Children raised in secure homes asked more questions, challenged ideas respectfully, and believed their voices mattered. Confidence, once rare, became common. Health clinics followed the growth of the communities. With stable addresses, families accessed consistent medical care. Pregnant women attended regular checkups, children completed vaccinations, and chronic illnesses were managed instead of ignored. Doctors and nurses spoke of fewer emergency cases linked to poor living conditions. A roof, it turned out, was also a form of medicine. Economically, the impact continued to ripple outward. Small businesses matured into cooperatives, cooperatives into regional suppliers. What began as a tailor's machine in a doorway grew into workshops employing apprentices from the neighborhood. Construction skills learned during the building of the homes became trades passed down, reducing unemployment and dependency. People who once waited for help now created it. With growth came debate. Some argued the project should expand faster. Others warned about sustainability. Community leaders, elected from within the neighborhoods, learned to navigate disagreement without division. Town halls became spaces of discussion rather than complaint. People argued fiercely, but with a shared understanding that progress was possible. Disagreement no longer felt hopeless, it felt productive. Captain Traore copyright, now older and more reserved, visited less often, but his presence still carried weight. When he did walk through the neighborhoods, he was greeted not with chants, but with nods of respect. The project had outgrown him, and that was its greatest strength. It no longer belonged to one man or one moment, it belonged to the people who maintained it daily. Critics from outside the country continued to analyze, question, and compare. Some praised the initiative, others dismissed it as symbolic. But numbers alone could not measure what had changed. You could not chart dignity on a graph or calculate the value of sleeping without fear. Those who lived there did not need validation, their lives were proof enough. As climate challenges intensified, the communities adapted. Rainwater collection systems were added, solar panels appeared on rooftops, and shared gardens helped cushion food shortages. The same collective spirit that had built the homes now protected them against an uncertain future. Resilience became a habit, not a reaction. Elders often reflected on the transformation with quiet amazement. They remembered when displacement fractured families and eroded traditions. Now, cultural ceremonies returned to courtyards, weddings filled streets with music, and funerals were marked with dignity rather than desperation. Home gave tradition a place to breathe again. One evening, during a power outage, families gathered outside under the moonlight. Stories flowed easily, some humorous, some painful, all shared. Children listened as adults spoke of the time before the homes, not to frighten them, but to teach them gratitude and responsibility. This was built for you, they said. Protect it, improve it, never forget why it matters. Nationally, the project reshaped expectations. Citizens began to ask different questions of leadership, not just about promises, but about plans, not just about speeches, but about outcomes. The idea that government could serve basic human needs no longer felt Macron v. It felt necessary. Years later, when historians would write about this period, they might debate policies, leadership styles, and geopolitical pressures. But in the quiet spaces between those debates lived a simpler truth. 50,000 homes had changed how a nation saw itself. Burkina Faso was no longer defined only by struggle, but by resolve. On any given morning, as sunlight spilled across rooftops and voices rose with the day, the neighborhoods told their own story. A story of people who had been given ground to stand in awe and chose not only to stand, but to build, to dream, and to carry each other forward.